Have you ever noticed how the longer you hold on to someone toxic, the more you lose pieces of yourself? You try to fix, to please, to make things work, thinking if you just try a little harder, they'll finally treat you right. But what if I told you that the moment you stop holding on is the moment you start coming back to life? It's like removing a leech that's been feeding off you quietly. It never screamed, never asked. It just drained you slowly while pretending to stick around. And the moment you pull it off, it doesn't cry in pain. It panics, not because it lost you, but because it lost control. That's what happens when you cut off a toxic person. They don't miss your presence. They miss the power they had over your peace. Because while you're busy keeping the peace, trying not to upset anyone, you have a choice. Keep tolerating what drains you, or finally choose yourself. And when you do, everything changes. The noise stops, the energy returns, and you begin to grow again. So, what really happens when you walk away from a toxic person? What shifts when you stop explaining, stop defending, and stop accepting less than you deserve? Stay with me, because what happens next might just change everything. Let's get started. Number 1, your mind becomes clear, and your voice returns. Let's talk about something most people don't expect when they cut a toxic person out of their life: the silence that follows. Not just silence in your phone or in your home, but silence in your mind. The constant noise, second-guessing, decoding hidden meanings, preparing for someone's next mood swing, it all starts to fade. And in that stillness, something powerful happens. You start hearing your own voice again. Here's the truth. Toxic people don't just create chaos around you. They create chaos inside you. They take up mental space. You start overthinking every word you say, wondering if you offended them, disappointed them, or triggered something. Their reactions become your compass. You adjust yourself constantly, not to grow, but just to avoid the next explosion or guilt trip. And over time, your own thoughts get buried under theirs. But when you finally walk away, when you remove their influence, that mental pressure releases. The noise stops. You no longer wake up bracing for tension. You no longer replay conversations trying to figure out where it went wrong. And without realizing it, your own voice, the one that had gone quiet, starts coming back. This is where Stoic wisdom comes alive. Marcus Aurelius said, "Peace comes when you no longer invite chaos." And Seneca reminds us, "The soul is strengthened in solitude." That solitude you feared, it's not loneliness, it's healing. It's where your real clarity returns, because without their influence clouding your judgment, you finally start to remember what you think, what you feel, what matters to you. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him James, had a long-term friendship that quietly controlled him. His friend never shouted, never threatened, but his words always left James questioning himself. Anytime James made a choice, there was a sarcastic remark. Anytime he succeeded, there was a passive-aggressive dig. James didn't even notice how much he had changed until they had a falling out. And after it ended, that's when it hit him. His anxiety dropped. His mind felt still. He started trusting his decisions again, not because someone approved, but because he finally felt like himself again. So how do you get there? First, recognize the weight they had on your mind. Second, protect your mental space like it's sacred. And third, let the silence stay. That quiet isn't emptiness, it's your voice returning. At the end of the day, cutting off a toxic person doesn't just remove a problem, It brings back something even more important: your clarity, your confidence, and your inner peace. Number 2, you regain emotional energy. Let's talk about something most people don't notice until it happens: how much emotional energy you get back after cutting off a toxic person. When you're around someone who constantly complains, manipulates, guilt trips, or creates drama, you become emotionally drained without even realizing it. You leave every conversation feeling heavier, second-guessing yourself, or mentally exhausted. But when that person is no longer in your life, suddenly everything feels lighter. And not just your schedule, your mind, your mood, your entire emotional state shifts. Here's the truth: toxic people don't just waste your time, they wear down your emotional stamina. You spend so much of your energy managing their moods, avoiding their reactions, or trying to make sense of their behavior that you don't have anything left for yourself. You think you're helping them, supporting them, being the bigger person. But the reality is, you're slowly burning out. And once they're gone, that emotional bandwidth comes rushing back. You realize you can breathe deeper, think clearer, feel more at ease. This is where Stoic wisdom offers clarity. Epictetus said, "He who guards his peace guards his power." And that's exactly what emotional energy is: power. It fuels your clarity, your discipline, your patience, your ability to show up for your own life. When you give that away to someone who constantly drains you, you weaken your grip on what really matters. But when you protect your peace, you protect your strength. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Brian, was in a friendship that slowly started to take more than it gave. His friend was always in crisis mode. Every conversation was about some new drama, some new person to blame, or some way the world was out to get him. Brian tried to be there. He listened, advised, reassured. But over time, he noticed something. After every interaction, he felt emotionally exhausted. It was like his friend was offloading his chaos, and Brian was absorbing it all. Eventually, Brian made a quiet decision. No confrontation, no dramatic exit. He just stopped engaging in the cycle. And almost immediately, he noticed a shift. He felt more focused. His mind wasn't tangled in someone else's problems. He had more energy for the people and projects that actually mattered to him. That's when it hit him. He'd been giving away his emotional energy to someone who didn't value it. So how do you regain that energy? First, recognize the drain. Pay attention to how you feel after spending time with someone. Second, set firm emotional boundaries. You're not a dumping ground for chaos. And finally, value your peace enough to protect it, because your energy is limited, and it deserves to go where it fuels your life, not where it gets stolen. At the end of the day, walking away from toxic energy isn't just about losing someone, it's about finding yourself again. And once that emotional weight lifts, you'll wonder why you ever carried it in the first place. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 3, you realize how much you tolerated. Let's talk about a realization that often comes long after the damage is done: how much you actually tolerated while trying to keep the peace. When you finally cut off a toxic person and get some distance, you begin to see things for what they really were. The constant guilt-tripping, the passive-aggressive comments, the subtle manipulation disguised as care or concern. At the time, you brushed it off. You told yourself they didn't mean it, or that maybe you were overreacting. But now, with space and clarity, you start to see the pattern, and it's undeniable. Here's the truth. Distance reveals what closeness once blurred. When you're in the middle of a toxic relationship, whether it's with a partner, a friend, or even a family member, you start normalizing unhealthy behavior. You adapt, you make excuses, you shrink yourself to keep things calm, and slowly your standards erode. But once you step away, it's like turning the volume down on chaos. You're no longer distracted by the noise, and you can finally recognize what was actually happening. You see how much of your energy went into managing their emotions, avoiding conflict, and sacrificing your own needs just to keep things together. This is where Stoic wisdom offers something powerful. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What you allow is what will continue. Stop feeding the fire of false peace." That false peace, the illusion of calm while you're quietly suffering, is one of the most dangerous places to be. It convinces you that things aren't that bad, even while your boundaries are being broken day after day. But once you stop feeding it, once you step away, the truth becomes clear. You tolerated far too much for far too long. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Claire, had been in a friendship for years that always felt a little off. Her friend constantly made backhanded compliments, guilted her for spending time with other people, and always played the victim when confronted. Claire stayed quiet to avoid drama. She told herself it was just part of the friendship. But when life shifted and they naturally drifted apart, Claire found herself feeling lighter. Then came the realization. She had been tolerating emotional manipulation for years, all in the name of keeping the peace. So how do you stop tolerating what doesn't serve you? First, honor what the distance is showing you. If clarity comes when someone's gone, trust it. Second, raise your standards. What you allow will shape your life. And third, never trade your peace for someone else's comfort again. At the end of the day, cutting off a toxic person isn't just about walking away. It's about waking up. And once you see how much you tolerated, you'll never settle for less than you're worth again. Number 4. They try to come back, but not for the right reasons. Let's talk about something that happens more often than people admit. Once you cut off a toxic person, they almost always try to come back. But here's the part most don't see right away. It's rarely for the reasons you hope. It's not about love. It's not genuine regret. It's about regaining control, re-establishing access, and restoring the dynamic they once benefited from. Toxic people don't miss you. They miss the version of you that tolerated them. Here's the truth. When someone loses the ability to manipulate or drain you, they don't just walk away. They circle back. They might show up with apologies, vague promises to do better, or reminders of the good times. They'll say all the right things to get back in, but their actions always reveal the same old patterns. Because what they're truly after isn't reconciliation, it's control. They don't want to rebuild the connection. They want to resume it, exactly where they left off, with all the benefits for them and all the cost for you. This is where Stoic wisdom speaks clearly. Epictetus said, "The wise do not return to chains they've broken." Once you've freed yourself from a relationship that drained you, the test isn't in cutting them off, it's in not letting them back in. Because the moment you do, the cycle starts again. The peace you fought for gets replaced with confusion. The clarity you gained starts to blur. And the strength you built quietly begins to unravel. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Daniel, finally walked away from a relationship that had been emotionally manipulative for years. His partner would constantly shift blame, twist his words and use guilt to get what she wanted. It took everything in him to break free. But once he did, he found peace. Real, lasting peace. But a few months later, she reached out. She didn't apologize for the past. Instead, she said she missed what they had. She played on nostalgia, on comfort, on familiarity. And for a moment, Daniel considered it. But then he remembered how long it had taken to feel like himself again. And that's when he realized what she missed wasn't him. It was the control she once had. So, how do you handle their return? First, don't let loneliness or nostalgia make you forget the reason you walked away. Second, watch their behavior, not their words. Intentions are easy to fake, but patterns never lie. And finally, protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. At the end of the day, cutting someone off isn't just about walking out, it's about staying out. And the moment you refuse to return to what once broke you, that's when healing becomes unshakable. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a thank God and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 5. You face temporary loneliness, but then real peace. Let's talk about one of the hardest parts of cutting off a toxic person. What happens right after? You finally set the boundary. You walk away. And then, silence. No more messages, no more familiar chaos, no more presence. And for a moment, that silence can feel like emptiness. You start questioning your decision. You wonder if it would have been easier to just stay. That temporary loneliness creeps in, not because you miss the pain, but because you were used to the noise. Here's the truth. The absence of chaos can feel uncomfortable when you've lived in it for too long. But that loneliness? It's not a sign you made the wrong choice. It's the space where peace is about to grow. Because the longer you sit in that stillness, the more you begin to realize something important. Being alone is nothing compared to being constantly drained. One is quiet, the other is exhausting. And once the fog clears, you don't just feel better, you feel free. This is where Stoic wisdom shines. Seneca said, "Solitude is not the absence of love, but the presence of self-respect." You didn't walk away because you stopped loving. You walked away because you started respecting yourself. Choosing to be alone for a while is not weakness, it's strength. It means you'd rather sit with yourself than surround yourself with people who make you feel small. And that's the moment real peace begins to take root. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Rachel, finally ended a long-term friendship that had become toxic. Her friend was constantly negative, dismissive, and emotionally unpredictable. But because they had history, Rachel stuck around longer than she should have. When she finally cut ties, the silence hit hard. No more daily texts, no more calls, no more presence. At first, it felt empty, like a piece of her life was missing. But over time, Rachel noticed something else. Her mood started to stabilize. Her confidence returned. She had more energy, more clarity, and more calm than she'd felt in years. And that's when she understood what felt like loss was actually space. Space to breathe, space to heal. So how do you move through that loneliness? First, don't confuse silence with absence. Sometimes the quiet is exactly what you need. Second, remind yourself that missing the routine isn't the same as missing the person. And finally, trust that peace always follows discomfort, especially when the discomfort comes from breaking free. At the end of the day, choosing peace over toxicity doesn't mean you'll never feel alone. But it does mean that when you stand in that solitude, you'll do it with your head held high because you chose yourself. And that's a kind of peace no one can take away. Number 6. You attract healthier people. Let's talk about one of the most powerful shifts that happens when you cut a toxic person out of your life. You start attracting healthier people. It doesn't happen overnight. At first, the silence feels strange. The space they left behind feels too big. But once that space starts filling with peace, confidence, and clarity, something incredible happens. You begin drawing in people who respect your boundaries, value your energy, and meet you with the same level of intention you've been giving to others for far too long. Here's the truth. The people we allow into our lives are a reflection of what we believe we deserve. When you tolerate chaos, manipulation, or disrespect, you unintentionally create space for more of the same. But the moment you raise your standards, not just in words, but in action, your entire circle begins to shift. You stop entertaining half-hearted connections. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for expecting mutual respect. And in return, you start attracting people who don't just accept the real you, they honor it. This is where Stoic wisdom offers deep perspective. Marcus Aurelius said, "Like attracts like. Elevate yourself, and your circle follows." When you begin living from a place of self-respect, the people who resonate with that energy will find you. You won't need to chase validation or prove your worth. The right people won't ask you to shrink. They'll celebrate your growth, not compete with it. They'll match your peace, not disturb it. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Josh, had spent years keeping toxic people in his life out of loyalty. Friends who made him feel small, relationships that drained him emotionally. He told himself that cutting ties would leave him alone, and for a while, it did. But over time, Josh changed. Not just who he allowed around him, but how he showed up for himself. He started setting boundaries, honoring his needs, and no longer entertaining drama. Slowly, the right people began to appear. Co-workers who respected his time, friends who gave what they received, even new relationships that felt effortless, not draining. And none of it would have happened if he hadn't first walked away from the ones who didn't deserve him. So how do you start attracting healthier people? First, stop settling. If someone constantly disrupts your peace, they don't belong in your circle. Second, live your standards out loud. Let your boundaries and values be clear through your actions. And finally, trust the shift. When you stop chasing and start aligning, the right people will meet you where you are. At the end of the day, cutting off a toxic person isn't just about who you let go of, it's about who you make room for. And once you choose yourself, the right people will choose you too. If you believe this video can help others, give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply. Number 7. You begin to grow again. Let's talk about what might be the most important change of all. What happens to you when the toxic influence is finally gone? You begin to grow again. Not just function, not just get through the day. You actually start evolving, healing, rebuilding the parts of yourself that had been neglected, silenced, or constantly under pressure. Because when you remove a toxic person from your life, you're not just creating distance, you're creating space. And in that space, growth finally has room to happen. Here's the truth. You can't grow in poisoned soil. When someone's presence makes you feel small, anxious, or constantly on edge, your energy isn't going toward development, it's going toward survival. You're stuck in a cycle of reacting, explaining, defending. And in that kind of environment, progress becomes impossible. But the moment that influence is gone, your nervous system settles, your mind clears, and for the first time in a long time, you're able to focus on yourself, not in defense, but in discovery. This is where Stoic wisdom offers a reminder that cuts deep. Epictetus said, "You cannot grow in poisoned soil, remove what withers your roots." Growth is natural, but only when the environment supports it. You weren't failing to evolve, you were trying to thrive in a space that was quietly suffocating you, and once you pull those roots out of toxic ground, you'll be amazed how fast life begins to return to them. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Emily, had been in a relationship for years that slowly eroded her confidence. Her partner never yelled, never exploded, but his criticism was constant. Little remarks, subtle jabs, passive-aggressive comments disguised as advice. Over time, Emily stopped taking risks, stopped pursuing the things she loved. She began to doubt her own instincts. But when the relationship ended, something shifted. It wasn't instant, but it was steady. She picked up old hobbies, she reconnected with friends, she started setting goals again, goals that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. And slowly, the version of herself she thought she'd lost came back stronger. So how do you start growing again after walking away? First, give yourself permission to rebuild. You don't owe anyone an apology for choosing peace. Second, nurture your space. Fill it with things, people, and habits that support your evolution. And third, be patient with the process. Growth doesn't always come in leaps, but it always comes once the weight is lifted. At the end of the day, cutting off a toxic person doesn't just remove a problem, it unlocks your potential. And when you stop surviving their chaos, you finally start becoming who you were always meant to be. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights.